好的，现在的话呢，我要邀请到我们的 Sophia 石哈，大家也看到哈，我们这位非常优雅的女性来介绍一下 IvyCompass。大家也知道哈，去年的话呢，我们这个 AFI 和这个思慧平台上呢，也是进行了很多场的这一个升学的讲座，也邀请到了很多位非常优秀的这一个独立的前藤校招生官哈，包括我们郑在内，以及这个独立的升学顾问。此外的话呢，也有很多这个优质的升学资源，所以的话呢，今年的话呢，我们是委托这个 IvyCompass 来帮我们把这些资源呢做一个整合，能更好的给我们的家长提供服务。现在的话呢，我就把时间交给我们的 Sophia 石，她是我们 IvyCompass 的这一个负责人，让她来给我们介绍一下 IvyCompass。
谢谢 Alison， 谢谢 Alison 的这个介绍和分享。我想跟大家分享一下我们 IvyCompass 呢，中文叫指南针教育咨询。我们的前身的是海育国际教育集团，海育教育国际集团是2014年成立的，所以我们的宗旨呢是在整个的升学过程当中，为家庭提供全方位的支持、服务支持和质量把控，同时在升学过程当中为孩子个人的成长提供保驾护航。我们还为家庭呢过滤一些口碑最好的前藤招生官的资源和独立的升学顾问，来对接一些课程和竞赛的辅导稀缺的教育资源，同时在 AFI 和思慧平台的支持下，为我们高中生提供一些志愿者领导力以及个人软实力提升的机会。同时在指导老师、升学辅导指导老师的这个背景和指导下，提供一些量身定做的他们所需要的最佳的量身定做的背景提升项目。所以你可以看到我们的业务在辅导 SAT 和升学辅导，包括这个背景提升，包括一些志愿者领导力的一些培养，提供全方位的升学所需要的整个的生态一个循环。那么下面我来介绍一下今天晚上的主讲嘉宾。Alison， 请你把 slide 放到 John 这一页。John， 我相信Mr. Morganelli， 去年2021年的时候，我记得他第一次讲座的时候有上千人，几乎900多人，上千人的这个听众。我也接触了不少前招生官。Mr. Morganelli 的这个 style 跟我接触的一些前招生官还有点不太一样，所以我想今天晚上大家应该是一个精神的一个家宴哈。可以听到他所指导的学生在一些所谓的怎么说呢，在他自身的这个 portfolio 的这个条件下面，能够经过 Mr. Morganelli 的指导，能够再提升一点，去够一些他可能认为的 dream school 和一些比较挑战的学校。我觉得他的方式方法和背后的 methodology 是非常有意思的，所以我不多花时间，我就把这个时间现在交给 John 来跟大家分享，作为升学的过程当中，您所具备的这些 portfolio 该如何去设计，如何去提供 evidence， 让我们的招生官在选择你的时候会眼前一亮。所以今天他分享的主题是怎么区分一个 resume 还是一个故事，申请故事。Now I'm giving the floor to Mr. John Morganelli for your sharing.
Thank you, Sophia. Let me, am I shared right now? Let's see, hold on one second.
Not yet.
Okay, give me 1 second here.
Sure.
Okay, are we all set? Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you so much. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Sophia, of course, for the introduction. Once again, I am John Morganelli, former Ivy League Director of Admissions at Cornell University, founder of Ivy League Admissions LLC, and author of Growing Ivy, How to Crack the Code on Elite College Admissions. This presentation is titled Application Resume versus Application Story, the difference between offer and waitlist. Okay, before we jump into college admissions, for those of you who did not attend some of my other presentations, I want to briefly introduce my background. I've been in college admissions at 3 different institutions, so I've had varied experiences at very different places. I've personally reviewed over 30,000 applications for admission throughout my career, over a decade in college admissions. I was very fortunate when I was at Lehigh University before I got to Cornell University. I was invited down to the University of Pennsylvania to review their committee-based evaluation review process, was able to get an inside look at that process and actually provide feedback on that process before they rolled it out to their staff. When I was at Cornell University in 2017, for those of you who don't know, the Ivy League has a group called the Ivy Plus group. The Ivy Plus is basically the entire Ivy League, plus MIT, Duke, and Stanford. And every 2 years, all of those institutions get together on one of the college campuses, and they have an enrollment summit where they share ideas and strategies. And so to that end, we were fortunate to host it in Ithaca, New York in 2017. And I had an opportunity to not only engage with colleagues from all of those institutions and all of the deans and directors from those institutions, but also learn, about how they do things. Most of the time, quite frankly, it's pretty similar to the way Cornell does it or the way Lehigh did it, but it was great to really get an opportunity to understand how the landscape of some schools outside the Ivy League, like Stanford or MIT, and how they engage in enrollment management. So that was a really unique opportunity. And then, of course, I was an Ivy League admissions director of admissions. I managed the entire office. I was appointed at a rather young age. I managed 20,000 applications per year. I supervised a staff of 80% PhD faculty members. And I've hired and trained over 40 application readers per year when I was managing the process at Cornell University. Okay, so after my presentations, I always try to collect some feedback to get a sense of how people respond to the presentation. And one of the things that I've heard a few times now is that sometimes people have a difficult time following because of a lack of familiarity with the terms. So for the first time, I decided it might be helpful to go over some definitions in advance. And if through the process of this presentation, you identify some other phrases or definitions that you're not familiar with, please do write them down, and I'm happy to discuss those when it's appropriate at the end of the presentation. But let me start with some definitions. The first is academic direction. When I refer to the term academic direction, I'm referring to kind of a broad direction in high school. So an example of an academic direction might be, I'm interested in engineering. I'm interested in the humanities. I'm interested in STEM areas outside of engineering. I'm interested in business. Those would be broad directions, and I refer to that as academic direction. To differentiate that from a major, and there's kind of two different types of majors that I refer to, a prospective major, right? A prospective major is the actual major that you're going to list on your application for admission. So that would be more narrow than your academic direction, right? Your academic direction might be, say, STEM, and your prospective major might say be information science, right? That could be an example of broad direction. Information science might be the intersection of STEM and social science, but that would be prospective major. And then the actual major would be the major that you identify when you are in college. Generally, it's the second semester of your sophomore year of college. That's your actual major. So 3 different ways of thinking about academic direction. First is broadly academic direction. The second is prospective major. That's what you're going to put on your application. And then third is your actual major. That's what you will identify in college and will declare in your second semester of your sophomore year, typically. And then I wanted to quickly go over holistic review. Holistic review is the review process that highly selective colleges and universities use. Holistic review means that we're considering the entire student, not just the grades, the test scores, the or the rigor, the courses the student has taken. Holistic review means we're going to take into consideration the way the student has spent their time and their energy, the way they engage with their community, the way the community sees that individual. So holistic means basically the whole person. And that's really important because generally only the United States really and highly selective schools in the United States engage in holistic review. I also wanted to note the definition of a personal statement or college essay. It depends on kind of what you call it, but when I refer to the personal statement, I'm referring to the essay or the college essay that is being sent to every school you apply. That is the prompt that might be on the Common App. It might be the prompt that's on the Coalition app. That's the essay that will be going to every single school, the personal statement or the college essay. That's distinctly different than the supplemental essay. The supplemental essay is the essay that is institutional specific, meaning that the college or the university that you're specifically applying to, they wrote this specific question, and your response to this question is only going to be seen by that college or university. That supplemental essay is, in my opinion, the most important essay question, and it's something we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about as we move forward. And then I wanted to identify these terms that I use as refer to the application story or the application narrative. These are terms that I use. If you went to a college and asked them about the application story, the application narrative, they might not know exactly what you're referring to because these are not official terms. These are the terms that I use to describe your story. And when I use the term application story or application narrative, I'm referring to the entire application, right? That means the application itself, the app you're filling out. That also means the curriculum that you're taking, the choices you make. That means it's the recommendations that you get. And of course, the essays you write, even the interview that you engage in. All of those pieces should support the application story or narrative, kind of interchangeable terms I use. And then the final two terms I wanted to note are overrepresented academic major and underrepresented academic major. When I refer to these as overrepresented, what I'm saying is that there are typically significantly more applicants than is typical for that specific major. When I refer to an underrepresented major, I mean there are significantly less applications than would be typical for this particular major. Overrepresented majors typically are things like computer science and biology, and underrepresented majors are typically things like Greek literature or the classics. And oftentimes what you find is that in overrepresented majors, it's harder, more competitive to get in. Underrepresented majors, typically a little less competitive to get in. And we'll talk about that in more depth as we move forward. Okay. Some of you may have seen this data during one of my other presentations, but I have yet to find a more objective way to describe why building the right story with the right elements, tone, and perspective matters so much. This data was taken directly from the Harvard lawsuit. And let's just take a moment to examine it in a bit more depth. What does it mean when you really look at it? If we only use grades and test scores, Asian students would represent 43% of the incoming class at Harvard, represented by Model 1 under the academic only column. When we throw in extracurricular and personal aspects, that percentage of the class drops to 26% or 25.99, represented by Model 3 under the extracurricular and personal column. That means that 17% of the spaces at Harvard are lost because the applicant failed to demonstrate desirable personal qualities through thoughtfully conceived extracurricular activities. This has nothing to do with the fact that the applicant is Asian. If you notice, I'm not even mentioning Model 4, which says demographics, which takes into account being Asian. I'm focused on the 17%. The difference between the 43% noted in Model 1 column and the 26% noted in Model 3 column. This 17% represents the students who really should have been admitted had they demonstrated desirable personal qualities through the thoughtfully conceived extracurricular activities. The point here is that extracurricular engagement matters a lot. And I can confirm throughout my career in highly selective college admissions that many Asian students spend their time and their energy on things that are not being as valued in this process at highly selective colleges and universities. Your job in this process is to make sure that you're choosing the right qualities, the right engagement, the right tone for your overall academic story. So let's spend a little bit of time exploring how we go about doing that. Okay, before we jump into learning more about how we build the application that reads like an academic story rather than a resume, it's really important to start with an understanding of the type of story we're trying to tell. There's lots of different stories. So what one are we trying to tell here? In my opinion, in order to determine what story we should be telling, all we really need to do is look at the questions that are being asked by the top 50 universities. The slide that you're looking at right now provides just a few examples, but if you were to dive deeper, you would find that over 80% of the top tier colleges are asking the same thing. They want to know, what do you want to study? Why do you want to study it? How have you explored it? And what might make you ready to contribute in this space at this particular college or university? These questions illustrate that our story is clearly an academic story. Remember, the application is not a resume. It's a story. If all they wanted was a list of achievements, the application would be quite simple. But the holistic review process is a quantitative and qualitative analysis that requires a story, not just a list of experiences. Most students, even the really smart students, will provide a rather disjointed list of experiences and achievements that often fails to effectively communicate the area of interest, engagement, and potential contribution. Effective academic stories are built through illustrating how a variety of different engagement experiences support the identified area of academic interest. These engagement experiences and the connections between them, they serve as the evidence that the student is interested, has explored, and is ready to contribute. Before you can build an academic story, though, you need to know the academic area that you plan to identify. Does that make sense, right? There's no way for you to say, I'm going to build an academic story in psychology if you don't know whether you plan to note your prospective major as psychology. So the first step is in identifying which college the student is seeking. In the beginning, there are three general choices under a university, right? So if we're talking about, let's just say for argument's sake, Cornell University or Columbia University, generally there are three traditional types. The first is your business college. Under business, you're going to find things like accounting, economics, finance, management, marketing. The next is an engineering college. That's, of course, all of the disciplines of engineering, civil engineering, chemical engineering, electrical engineering. And then basically arts and sciences is for the most part everything else. So it's important early on to understand at least what falls under each of those categories. And that will at least start your understanding of how to start exploring. If you hope to apply as a prospective engineering or prospective business student, it's advised you make that decision quite early. Both of those colleges are rather specific and then have very specific interests that translate into pretty deep academic stories that they've built over time. Because many of my students will fall into the final grouping of arts and sciences, it's impossible to talk about all of these colleges in one presentation. I often focus my time and energy on arts and sciences because it is in fact the most broad of the colleges. Arts and sciences offers everything from economics and computer science and biology to things like Greek literature and the classics, so it's very broad. Before we discuss the right prospective majors, it's important to note the distinction between a college and a university. At a university, there are often multiple colleges. For example, at Cornell University, there are 7 different colleges. I tell you this because as we move forward, we'll be talking about the importance of identifying the college at the university that the student plans to apply to, meaning there is a strategy and there are consequences behind choosing one college over another at the same university. For example, in most instances, it is much harder to earn an offer from the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell than, for example, the College of Industrial Labor Relations at Cornell. Just like it's much harder to get into NYU Stern than it is to get into NYU Arts and Sciences. Each college at the same university will have different levels of competitiveness and transferability. And since the major exists in the college, the prospective major choice impacts the competitiveness of getting in and even the transferability once you get there. Let me give you an example. A student wants to apply to NYU Stern because she wants to study finance, but she learns that it's harder to get into NYU Stern than it is to get into NYU Arts and Sciences. So she wants to consider applying to NYU Arts and Sciences and then transferring. We call this an internal transfer because it's internal to the university. So she wants to apply to NYU Arts and Sciences and then consider transferring to Stern once she's been accepted. Is this a good idea? No. It's very unlikely she will be able to transfer into Stern from Arts and Sciences, as they take very few external or internal transfers. Thus, if you want to study in a real business program, this strategy would not make sense because she is unlikely to get into the business college and thus likely to be locked out of the college she's actually interested in. Let me give you another example. A student wants to apply to NYU Arts and Sciences to study computer science, but she learns it's harder to get into NYU as a prospective computer science major than it is as applying as a prospective sociology major. So she wants to consider focusing her application on the social science-centered experiences to get in, then declare computer science as her major once she's already been admitted. Is this a good idea? Probably yes. Of course, assuming that she has sufficient social science-related experience and that she puts that experience together the right way without letting the university know she really wants computer science, this would be a good decision because you may transfer quite easily from something like sociology to computer science because it would live in the same college. The 2 points I'm trying to make here are as follows. Number one, transferring amongst colleges, even at the same university, as noted, NYU Arts and Sciences transferring to NYU Stern, that is not guaranteed. And in some colleges, some universities, it might be very unlikely. So it's important that you recognize transferring amongst colleges can be difficult. Point number two, changing majors in the same college, as noted, sociology to computer science in the College of Arts and Sciences at NYU, for example, that's quite easy to do. Thus, when we are considering your prospective majors, we are really considering two things. One, we want to make sure we have identified the appropriate college for the student so that he or she has access to the major he or she actually wants. And number two, assuming we've identified the correct college, we want to consider the competitiveness of each prospective major in that college. For example, computer science and pre-med are very competitive compared to, say, sociology, which falls under the social sciences. It's important to understand that you want to look at the competitiveness of each prospective major and consider that within the context of the engagement experience that you currently have in those areas. Okay, now before we jump into this slide, I want to provide a quick reminder on what we were talking about as it relates to the difference between a prospective major and an actual major, because we're diving into the important part now. Prospective major is the major we're putting on your application. It tells the reader what you plan to do, but it does not mean that that is what your major is when you get to college. You will still need to identify that major by selecting it generally in your second semester of your sophomore year. That's your actual major. Okay. Now, once a student has identified the type of college, arts and sciences, business, or engineering, the next objective is to identify that prospective major. So why do we need to identify a prospective major? I've gotten this question many times. Parents, students alike, they ask me, why do I have to choose a prospective major? Can't I just apply undecided? Which brings me to a pretty important reminder here. High school guidance counselors often tell students that colleges want well-rounded students. And if you go to a college and you ask them, do you want well-rounded students? They're very, very likely to say yes, because no one says they don't want well-rounded people on their campus. But the truth of the matter here is college admissions officers, their job is not to find well-rounded students. Rather, their job is to enroll a well-rounded class. And there is a significant difference. So getting back to the question of why can I not apply as an undecided student? The answer is you can apply as an undecided student if you are the right kind of undecided. If you are undecided because you have fallen in love with multiple academic disciplines through varied but meaningful engagement, you may be able to apply as undecided. But most undecided students are undecided because of limited exposure to academic programs, limited engagement, like limited clubs, limited summer programs, limited research. And so the undecided aspect is in fact because they have not explored, have not investigated. Those types of students, even with strong grades, even with very strong test scores, those types of students are often waitlisted at top tier schools. I believe the best strategy is to find one area of academic interest and create depth. If you have time, Sure, it's great to add other areas on top, but it is imperative that you have substance and depth in one area first. Okay, so let's assume for a moment that we have successfully identified an academic direction and we want to begin building the evidence. It starts with illustrating your interest by taking an initial action to explore. The most accessible exploratory experiences are your high school clubs and organizations. I know some of the high schools don't have amazing clubs and organizations. I hear it all the time. But if you, as the student, as the high school student, if you are not interested in the club offerings, or if you think that they are just quite frankly they're not interesting within themselves, they don't offer anything interesting, you have to understand that doesn't mean you have a free pass not to engage. A high school is a community. A college is a community. When you go to college, there's an expectation that you're going to engage, that you're going to contribute to the community. In order to understand whether you will do that, the college readers are going to ask themselves, do you engage and contribute to your school community? If the answer is no, it's going to be hard to make the case that you're likely to contribute to the college community. So imagine for a moment, there are no clubs or organizations that fit what you're interested in at your high school. Your job is to start one, right? Let's just say for argument's sake that your school has a club or organization, but it's just really not well run or it's poorly structured. Your job is to contribute something to that space. That doesn't mean you have to create the greatest organization of all time. It doesn't mean that you need to reorganize or revitalize an organization that's not functioning well, but you need to contribute something small. So it doesn't, maybe you start an organization with a few friends and maybe it's not the most impressive organization, but at the very least allows a few people to explore something they're interested in. That's a win. Maybe you help an organization get back on their feet by coming up with a new direction or new structure. That would be a win because it illustrates contribution. But doing nothing at your high school will be very problematic. You must build a foundation as it relates to in-school engagement. From that foundation of in-school extracurricular engagement, the student can add to that foundation through things like summer programs and community shadowing and out-of-school organizations. The key here is you want to build, right? So you're starting with an in-school club. Let's just say you're part of the environmental awareness club. And then you decide you want to engage in a summer program. Well, now we want a summer program that supports your interest in the environment. And then maybe you decide you want to engage in something like supplemental coursework. Maybe your high school isn't offering AP environmental science this year. So you decide to take a course at a local community college related to environmental science or environmental policy to broaden your coursework experience. And then maybe there's an out-of-school organization that's focused on clean water issues in your community. So now you've taken your environmental awareness club in school and you've built on that out of school through summer programs, through supplemental coursework, through out-of-school organizations. After we've done that, what we want to do is create depth, right? So in order to differentiate yourself, right? There's lots of smart kids applying to college. They're all going to, for the most part, have a prospective major. How do we differentiate one smart student from another smart student? In my opinion, it's through focus and depth. And once you've built a foundation through a high school club and a summer program and maybe some supplemental coursework, now you're ready to create depth through identifying subtopics. So maybe, for example, underneath the idea of environmental awareness, I'm interested in solar farming, right? That might be a subtopic that I would explore. You can explore from two different perspectives from the way I see it. And I think if good students will explore from both if they have the opportunity. The first is research-based, right? This is an academic question. So for example, if I'm interested in understanding, how solar farming can impact the environmental, positively impact my community from an environmental perspective, then I might engage in an academic research project that explored the impact of solar farms. Right? That academic research could be done with a mentor. Oftentimes it's done with a mentor. And that academic, the deliverable on that, the actual research paper or the abstract from the paper, that can serve as the foundation of the rest of your application, right? So now you can build your story around that academic research, and it's supported by your engagement in school, your summer programs, your out of school programs, or your supplemental coursework. The other way to create depth and specificity, and I think that this is a really differentiating factor, and if you can connect it to your research, it's even better, is issue-based community research. Meaning that if, for example, we are interested in solar farming, it would be even better if there was a debate or an issue in your own community about solar farming. So what I oftentimes do with my students is we look for the issues in advance, right? We don't dive into research until we find an issue. So, for example, I had a young man, who was very interested in environmental awareness. He was involved in the clubs, he did the summer programs. And so then we were looking for an issue because we wanted to build community investigation around something that's actually happening. We found that there was a big debate around solar farming. And the big debate was basically how much farmland should they give up to build solar farms. And so now we knew there was an issue because it was being debated in his community. We took that issue, we engaged in academic research. So he worked with a mentor to learn how solar farming impacts the community. And one of the big issues that was being debated was the negative impact to the farm of not having crop yields anymore. So he actually did academic research as well on the different classifications of soil. Soil classification 1, 2, 3, and 4, and what are the different yields of soil. So now he has like some findings about solar farming. He has some findings about the yield on crops and different levels of soil, categorizations of soil. And he's ready now to go back to the issue that he originally found about solar farming, and he's ready to write an advocacy piece. So now he's going to say, based on my engagement in my environmental awareness club in high school, based upon the summer program I did, based upon the community college class that I took, based upon the academic research I did with my mentor, I think X, Y, and Z about this solar farming issue. And he writes that article, an advocacy article. He submits it to his school newspaper. He submits it to his local newspaper. And now you've created depth and focus for his application. The benefit of all of this is that you're illustrating the qualities that these colleges really, really value. They want to see curiosity, self-motivation, independence, creativity, problem-solving, persistence. And more importantly than the actual application, in my experience, students who go through this process of building the foundation and then going out and learning how to focus, what happens is they learn how to investigate the world around them. They begin to understand how a fleeting question like, why does my high school receive less funding than another high school that's only 10 or 15 minutes nearby? A fleeting question that passes through their mind. They learn how they can turn those questions into true investigatory experiences that lead to deeper understanding and provides the opportunity for young people to learn how to contribute and to solve multidisciplinary problems. So the process itself builds a fantastic application, but it's really important because I see students grow as learners through the process. Okay, so before we jump into the next slide, I want to give another quick reminder, and that's on the difference or to define the academic narrative, the academic story, right? So the academic narrative is, or the academic story, whatever you want to use, the term you want to use, those are all of the elements, right? All of the pieces that come together to form the academic direction, right? So the slide that you're looking at right now, I'm going to take a few moments just to provide a more visual illustration here of the different elements that fit into the story and how that story determines the student chances of earning offers from top-tier universities. So let's start with the green colored box, which illustrates the 6 different categories of engagement. The first is your in-school clubs and organizations. So as an example, underneath there, I put Science Olympiad, right? That's an in-school club or organization. It's foundational. It's expected that good students will have at least some in-school engagement that is in fact connected to what they say we want to do. So if you're in 3 clubs, but none of them are connected to what you say you want to do, that would be, from my perspective, insufficient. If you're in 3 clubs and 2 of them represent exactly what you want to do, that would be sufficient. You don't need to have 20 examples. You need just a couple in school clubs and organizations to support your area of academic interest. The second category is something like a summer program. I think summer programs I consider them to be foundational. I know that there are a lot of very competitive summer programs out there. Some of them are quite selective. But the fact of the matter here is that colleges and universities do not see highly selective summer programs the way I think students and parents and guidance counselors often do. I think students and parents and guidance counselors think that, if you're reading, let's just say you're a reader for NYU and the student has attended Columbia's summer program. I think a lot of students think that the reader's reading and saying, well, wow, the student attended Columbia's summer program. Columbia is more selective than NYU. This student's amazing. We must take them. And that's really not what's happening. The colleges, universities are making their own determinations on the qualities of the student. And it's not based upon another program's identification of whether the student is ready. Yes, highly strong students probably got into highly selective summer programs. And that often means that those same students will end up getting into highly selective colleges. But I really do not believe that highly selective summer programs are the reason students get into highly selective colleges. The value of the summer program is the connective tissue between what the summer program is and what you say you're going to do. So if you went to a super selective summer program and it's not connected to what you want to do, or is only loosely connected to what you want to do, I would say your summer program is not providing you as much value as you would want. And I consider summer programs to be more foundational, meaning that I like to do it summer after 9th, maybe summer after 10th. And rarely do I focus on summer programs summer after 11th, because at that point, we've generally moved on to research or possibly academic competition if the student is of that level. Sometimes for a small group of students, we've moved on to these quote unquote very selective summer programs that are research oriented, but it's not something that I personally focus on as an end goal. It just happens to come. And then we have jobs, internships, shadowing. I put 3 different categories there because really what we're talking about is kind of real world industry related experience there. So whether it's a job that pays you, an internship that's paid or unpaid, or whether you're shadowing or doing an interview series where you just interview some people from an area you're interested in, it's about getting out there and understanding how this area of academia functions in the real world. So an example, as I put there, I apologize. The example for the summer program I noted was the BU Rise program. So that's an example of a summer program. And then the example of a internship would be like an internship at the wildlife sanctuary. I had a student who did that last year. And then research. So what is research? So I want to give you a quick overview of what I consider research to be. Now, I think a lot of students get nervous when they start to hear the term research. They think that this is something, scary and really big. And students who are not interested in STEM areas, I think they wonder what research is. If it's not a laboratory-based biology, traditional lab experience research opportunity, they wonder what is economic research? What is social science research? So first and foremost, everybody can do research. It is not only for STEM students. And I would argue that research actually probably has more impact for non-STEM students, mostly because there's less students doing research in the non-STEM areas. In the STEM areas, you do get a lot of research. Most of it's not done incredibly well as it relates to the way the student's building their story, but there's still a lot of it. On the social science side and humanities side, definitely, there's almost no real research, even from top tier students. And so I would encourage students who are interested in non-STEM areas to be intentional about thinking about how they could, in fact, engage in academic research. And then the question is, what is the deliverable on research? From my experience, there's a few different levels of research, if you will. If someone sat down tonight and engaged in a research project all by themselves and then published it on a personal blog, is that research? Well, it depends on how you define research. And the question is, does that research help you as it relates to getting into college? I would say generally probably not, right? That there's some level of evidence needed that this was a meaningful experience. And if it's on a personal website or blog, and if you did it in a relatively short period of time and you're not able to identify sources or anything like that, probably not going to provide much value. The second level would be like the most minimal level that would provide value. And that would be generally that you would engage in a real research project. Maybe that's by yourself. Maybe that's with a teacher from high school helping you along. Maybe it's an independent study course that you're doing. And that at the end of that research paper might be published on a student journal. And there's really kind of two different levels of student journals. There's non-rigorous and rigorous, basically meaning that on your rigorous student journals, they might require 3 or 4 rounds of revision. So you need to give yourself some time. In non-rigorous, they might not have revisions, or it might not be being reviewed by anybody, peer reviewed, in that space. After your student journals, you have and I think both of those student journal levels are fine, meaning that they would add value to your story, especially if that research supports the rest of what you've done. A really good research question pulls in the things you've done in the past and foreshadows what you're planning on doing in the future. The next level of impressiveness, though, would be if you were to be published in an undergraduate journal, like Stanford, for example, has an undergraduate journal for undergraduate college students. If a high school student were to get into one of those, I think that that's something that would be impressive, but you would literally have to let the college admissions officer know that, because I will tell you, they do not recognize journals just like by looking at them. So if you are publishing in a more impressive space, you should go out of your way to let that admissions officer know that. And then of course, above that generally is when you're talking about professional level journals, faculty level journals. If you're using your research for ICEF or Regeneron, you're either usually at that level of undergraduate student journal or possibly even higher. So those are kind of the different levels of research. Generally, my students will engage with a mentor to have them work through that I help them kind of identify the general questions, and then they narrow the questions, build the research, and we take the research, we put it in the application itself, the abstract itself, and we build the story around that research most of the time. Then we have competition. I don't spend a whole lot of time focusing on competition unless a student kind of raises their hand and says this is something that they are interested in, mostly because it's difficult to identify whether or not a student's going to be successful or not in competition. We'll talk a little bit in a little bit later in the slide and throughout the rest of this presentation about whether or not you need competition, or what I refer to as objective achievement from competition. But of course, if you are capable of objective achievement from competition, it always, of course, adds value. I don't think it is necessary to get into top tier schools. We'll talk about that in more detail as we move forward, but that's another category. And then the final category that I put like a little star next to it on the slide is what I refer to as local engagement. Mostly, there's a star next to it, mostly because I'm not sure that other people recognize this as a category, but I will tell you this is a defining factor for many of my students as it relates to building their application. The stories that I build are community-oriented, they're local, they illustrate that the student understands how to take something that's being learned in the classroom and explore it in their community. It's a really important skill set for life, right? And if you can identify that through your college application, you definitely will stand out. And so local engagement is an important part of what I try to bring in. Now, it's not possible for every single student, depending on their area of academic interest. I have a young lady who applied as a particle physics student. We didn't have too much, at least academically connected local engagement, right? Particle physics in a local community is not easy to explore. But for many areas of academia, there are local community explorative experiences that you can build around, and I highly encourage you to consider it. If you see the arrow that's pointing from the green box to the other two categories, those connected engagement categories that are noted 1 through 6, those different categories then fit into what I refer to as the academic narrative engagement element. So you take those categories and we ask ourselves, how do these categories provide the substance I need for the elements of the story we're going to be building? So element number 1 of the story is, of course, your introduction, your motivation. How did you become interested in this area of academia? For example, maybe you were in the Environmental Awareness Club, and that led you to the wildlife internship that you did. And during that wildlife internship, let's just say for argument's sake, you were in charge of giving tours. And during one of those tours, you were doing some research and you found something that was quite fascinating. Now you have a motivation for your interest. And we want to build off of that motivation. After we have a motivation, right, we want to narrow that interest and develop our research question. So the example of that would be the solar farming research question or the community investigation that followed up on the initial club engagement and the internship. So you have academic research, you have community exploration, and you're narrowing your area of focus from something broad like environmental awareness to something a little more focused, like I'm interested in solar farming or clean water, clean air, Superfund sites, whatever it is, but it's falling under the umbrella of environmental awareness. And then we have the expression of the narrowed interest through the deliverable. The two main deliverables that I focus on are research papers and advocacy articles, mostly because I know everyone can do it. If they put their mind to it, everyone is capable of a research paper. I know it sounds like it's a lot, but it's really not that hard if you have a mentor to help you, right? And so everyone can get there if they put their mind towards it. And those two deliverables, research paper, advocacy articles, or some form of videos or otherwise, those can be incredibly powerful to build your story around. And then the fourth engagement element is what I refer to as objective achievement. And you'll see in parentheses there, it says non-ED schools. What do I mean by that? Basically, what I mean is that I really do believe that you can get to every single school in the country that offers early decision with just the first three elements noted on the slide. Give a strong motivation for your interest, illustrate a narrowing of that interest, give them a deliverable that illustrates research or advocacy, and you can get into basically, in my opinion, every school that offers an early decision way of applying. That's basically every single school in the country, with the exception of Harvard, Princeton, Yale, Stanford, and MIT. Those 5 schools do not offer early decision. They have restrictive early action. We'll talk about that probably in a little more depth later on. They are fundamentally, in my mind, different than the ED schools. The schools that have ED, Columbia, Penn, Cornell, Brown, Dartmouth, Duke, Hopkins, right? They all have ED. The ED schools, I really believe, top 3 elements, do it well, you can get in. If you want to get to the MIT, Stanford, Princeton, Harvard, I really do believe you're at some level of a disadvantage if you don't have some semblance of objective achievement. And then the final piece here, I just wanted to quickly go over with you this engagement review grade. I give that as part of my benchmarking the college list process. Sometimes I'll meet with a student in an inquiry meeting, right? Where we're just kind of talking through the student's areas of interest and seeing whether or not it'd be a good fit for consulting. And of course, every parent, just like I would want to, they want to know, right? Like, what type of college do you think my student is capable of getting into? And in that meeting, of course, we have the grades, we have have their transcript, we know the courses they've taken, we have their standardized tests. And I think families are sometimes surprised that I don't have a significant level of confidence to say yes or no, because I really believe, having done this for a decade, that this process is significantly more complex than me identifying, looking at a transcript and a standardized test and being able to tell you how high you might be able to go. For my clients, what I do is I go through this process. We go through every club that they've been part of, every summer program, job, research, experience, competition. We ask ourselves, how does it fit into the narrative? And then we grade the engagement. We ask ourselves, first of all, how many narrative engagement elements do we have? And how strong is the evidence for each one of those elements? Once I know that, plus the grades and the standardized tests, then I pretty much know, with the exception of a few students, I try to predict the likelihood of my students, my clients getting into the colleges that they apply to. And I was wrong, this past year, I was wrong with one student that I really expected to get in that didn't get in. The rest of the students that I predicted were all correct. Why? Not because I am just a genius and know whether students are going to get in or not, but because I go through a very in-depth process that identifies the qualities and characteristics that the colleges are looking at. And thus I have a pretty good insight into how the student will be reviewed in this process. Okay, now I want to take a moment to review the engagement of a student who builds focused engagement versus traditionally well-rounded students. First, I want to note that these are real student profiles. The students' SAT scores for both of these students were exactly the same, 1480. Second, the students had the exact same number of AP courses. These particular students both took 7 AP courses. And they both applied, they did not apply the same year, but they applied 1 year apart to the same school, Johns Hopkins. So let's just kind of walk through the experiences and time commitment just for a moment here. So we'll start with the top student. Both of these students, as you see, came to me interested in pre-med and then moved to public health. Now, one student, the waitlisted student, came to me significantly later in the process as a senior. And so we basically had to take what the student did and turn it into the best story possible. The student, the environmental public health student came to me as a sophomore. And so we had time to kind of focus the engagement a bit more. So they were both interested in pre-med, and we moved both of them to public health because for the most part, almost every pre-med student I moved to public health because it's significantly easier to get in. So we take a look at the environmental public health student. Look at the way the students spend their time and their energy. Science Olympiad Club, 75 hours per year. General hours, that's how they describe it in the application on the Common App, so that's why it's listed there that way. But 75 hours approximately per year. The student was also the VP of the Environmental Awareness Club at the school, 75 hours per year. The student engaged in a local county health bureau research experience where basically focused on environmental health concerns. And that was about 20 hours over a period each year for a period of 2.5 years. And then there was a deliverable from that. The student wrote an op-ed to the newspaper about a water quality issue that was brought up through the environmental health investigation. That again was about 20 hours per year. She did 2 of them, if I remember correctly. And then the student did a mentor-led research project into water quality at Superfund sites that was led by a faculty member at, I believe it was Virginia Tech. And that was 50 targeted hours. And then that student presented at a conference that the faculty member was able to get that student into a conference to present at. And the student published that research in a student journal. And that was about 10 additional hours for the presenting and the publishing part in 2 separate years. So you see here about 240 hours. Of course, there probably were more hours that were put into this behind the scenes, but about 252 hours that were spent on this specific student. At least that's what we put on the Common App on an hourly basis. For the other student that came, this is what the student did, right? They were also part of Science Olympiad, which was 75 hours. But this student had done local hospital shadowing, of course, because they were interested in pre-med, 75 hours. They did a biology-focused wet lab research experience, which is another 75 hours. The student was treasurer of the Habitat for Humanity Club, president of the peer tutoring club, captain of the tennis team, played the piano, and was also captain of the fencing team. You know, at first glance, I think many people say like, wow, there's a lot of leadership here. Captain of the tennis team, you know, research in biology-based research, shadowing at a hospital. The problem is those things don't really further the story the student's telling, right? Captain of the fencing team, captain of the tennis team, you know, captain might add just a tiny bit of value, but the fencing and the tennis really don't add too much. Piano really is not adding too much. President of the peer tutoring group might add something if you write an essay about it and you write it well, but if you don't, it doesn't really add too much and doesn't really further the public health narrative. And the biology-focused research and the hospital engagement really sound pre-med. In fact, we didn't even list those on the application because it would have detracted from the student because they sound pre-med. So the point here is that focused time is quite important, and general engagement that is unfocused really is not that important. It doesn't add nearly as much value as you would expect. Even if, in this instance, the students had very similar grades, very similar standardized test scores, very similar rigor. But even if the well-rounded student had better grades, maybe even better test scores, I would argue if you showed me those 2 students, I know it's way easier to build a compelling, differentiating academic story with the focused student than it is with the well-rounded student. There's a significant advantage for the focused student compared to the well-rounded student, especially as you take a look at these 2. Okay. So let's fast forward now to the time when it's actually time to apply. You know, the next step on your journey, imagine for a moment, right? You've identified kind of a directional area of academic interest. You built your foundational engagement through clubs and organizations. Then you did a summer program. Maybe you did some community exploration. You then decided to create depth. You engaged in a research project where you actually have a research paper with a abstract that you're going to build around. And maybe you even have some advocacy articles that you are going to submit as part of your application that you wrote in addition to the research. You're now ready to apply to college. We know broadly what you're interested in. Maybe you're interested in, say, public health because you're interested in going pre-med. How do we proceed from this point forward? Okay, this is in fact a critical juncture in your journey. And before deciding what prospective major you're going to put down on your application, you have to have an understanding of the following things. First and foremost, you have to understand how each of your experiences can serve as evidence for your interest and the ability to contribute to this specific prospective major. For example, what prospective major direction does your engagement in the school newspaper support, right? So it's a question I'd be asking if you were in the school newspaper and we were trying to determine what prospective major we're going to be putting down. I'd be saying, what prospective majors does being in the school newspaper support? Hint, for the most part, it supports all of them because you can write about any topic you want. But we go through that process of identifying how each experience you have supports a specific prospective major. The second thing that we have to understand is the competitiveness of each major option. For example, sociology versus biology. Biology is significantly tougher, right? And whether that competitiveness is supported by the quality of the student's engagement in these areas. For example, if you were interested in, say, engineering, but the student only joined the robotics team in, say, 11th grade, we have to ask ourselves, will there be enough evidence based on the competitiveness of engineering, for example, to identify this area? Of course, it depends on the rest of the student's engagement. So each piece of what you've done is a puzzle piece. And what we're doing now is trying to identify how does each of those puzzle pieces support a prospective major. Now, if you look at the slide here, what you see is that there are going to be a lot of different ways to get where you want to go. So let's just say you're interested in pre-med, you want to go to medical school eventually, right? And for this example, we'll pretend you're applying to Cornell University. Well, the first question we have to ask is, what college at Cornell would support your interest in going to medical school? At Cornell, there's 3 different areas. You could apply to the College of Arts and Sciences, College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, or the College of Human Ecology. All 3 of those colleges would offer paths to medical school. And then once you've identified one of those colleges, you need to explore the options underneath those colleges. So in arts and sciences, in addition to, of course, something like biology and public health, right? There are lots of other majors that you could identify, like sociology, bio and society, environment sustainability, psychology, science and technology, science communication and public engagement. And that's just 6 examples right here for one college at Cornell. Imagine you add an additional 2 colleges in. You're talking about sometimes 10, 15, 20 different directions you could go, all with varying degrees of competitiveness to get in, that could get you where you eventually want to go. If you've started this process early, if you've made intentional decisions about how you spend your time with a clear academic direction, this process should be rather straightforward. If you're like most students and you've engaged in varied experiences without a focus, without a theme, that's when this becomes significantly more complex. And what happens is most students just choose. They say, well, it's not that hard, I just pick. But that choice has consequences, and oftentimes the students don't know those consequences when they make the choice. So let's imagine here for a moment, you're interested in applying pre-med to Cornell, and just again, free advice, whether you decide to apply to college, if you're thinking pre-med, you do not ever write pre-med down on your application. All it does is make it significantly harder to get in. The only caveat to that would be if you're applying to the accelerated BSMD programs, right? You can get a Bachelor of Science and a medical degree in 7 years, oftentimes. Then you, of course, have to add pre-med to your application, and that's when you do want to build your pre-med experience. But outside of accelerated medical programs, I'd suggest it's not overly important to focus on pre-med. It's better to go public health, and then from there, shift to pre-med when it's appropriate. Okay, so as you can imagine, there are many ways to build an application for admission. When we talk about pre-med, we're talking about at one college, there's 3 different colleges, 6 to 10 different majors in one college. Add all the different majors, all the different programs, all the different colleges in, and this can become pretty complex. I've developed over 20 different health-focused stories to differentiate my students from other health-focused students. That's what you do to differentiate typical smart kids from other smart kids, right? They're all smart, they all have the grades, they all have the SAT scores. Now you need a story in order to differentiate them if you want them to get taken over somebody who might have higher grades or, in theory, more academic rigor. The truth of the matter here is applying to college is very easy, but applying strategically to college, understand the impact of the decisions you make, that's less easy and sometimes can be complex if you don't have an understanding of all the different dynamics. Okay, this is the first time I've ever done this. It's not the prettiest slide in the world, but I like to handwrite all of my notes. If there are any clients are in the audience today, they know that. I handwrite my notes and I upload them. So I decided to just copy a PDF version of my notes because I think it's the best way I could illustrate the process that I go through to begin determining the most strategic way to apply to college. So this student came to me after what became an unintended gap year. The student applied to college. The students from the West Coast applied, parents both highly educated, good grades, attended a brand new high school out there and didn't get very good guidance and decided to apply pre-med because that's what the student wants to do. They want to go to medical school. If you can see the engagement that I jotted down there in my notes, you see things like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, journalism editor, chief student judicial officer, journalism intern. I think even the students in the audience, right, who haven't gone through this before probably are looking at that saying, that doesn't sound like pre-med to me, right? And so the fact of the matter here is that this student who applies under the umbrella of pre-med had no real evidence for pre-med. Even if the student had evidence for pre-med, it's not a good idea. But this student had no real evidence for pre-med and thus was refused at pretty much every single school the student applied to. Of course, disappointed and saddened by it, they came to me. And so what did we do? First and foremost, I went through all of the engagement. And as you can see on this slide, the first line, it says U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And then in the parentheses next to it, it says ecology, environment, policy. That's me going through and kind of generally, directionally identifying how would this experience with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, what areas might this experience support? So I did that with the journalism editor. Obviously, it supports journalism and policy, chief student judicial officer, policy, politics, government, right, ethics. So I go through the process of identifying how each experience might support an area of academia. After I'm done with that process, I now want to understand how those more broad directions that I noted can fit into a very specific college or university. So this student wanted to go to Cornell. And as I went through and looked at the experiences, I came to the conclusion that the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences was the right college for the student. And so then I went through each major offered at that college and I asked myself the question, does this experience support that prospective major? So for agriculture, as you can see, I wrote down agriculture because I thought that there was evidence to support agriculture. And you'll see in the parentheses next to it, it says 2 to 4. And the reason it says 2 to 4 is because I believe that depending on how flexible or loose I am with my interpretation of how this engagement experience supports the major, I think there are 2 to 4 experiences that could support agriculture. I thought there was only one that supported climate change. I thought there were 3 to 4 that supported environment and sustainability, and so on and so on. And then you see at the bottom there on the right of the column, number 13 and 14, I had written down viticulture, I'd written down soil science, mostly because I know soil science is a rather easy way to get into Cornell if you have evidence. But even me being as flexible as I could really didn't see how I could fit the evidence into what they're actually doing in the soil science department at Cornell. So they got crossed off as no longer possibilities. This is a process that I go through with every single student, and I believe it is probably the most important process. And it's the main reason I almost never just edit people's essays. Now, just to be clear, I do edit my client essays. What I'm saying is I don't edit people's essays who are not my clients. And the reason I say that is because many times, after these types of presentations, or I, develop a relationship with a family just through a meeting, and they'll say, John, can you just please take a look at my essay and just throw some edits on there for me? Just 20 minutes, just get on there. And the reason I won't do it is not because I'm trying to be mean, right? It's because if I start working on an application, then I, to some degree, in my mind, have approved the way we've built it. And because I didn't see this process happen, I didn't see the process where the student went through all of their experiences, identified the best ones, took those experiences, identified how it fit into the story, took that story and identified how the elements of the story supported a specific prospective major from this specific school. Since I didn't see that process, then I have to assume that the student and whomever they're working with made all of those choices correctly. And in my experience, that is not the case. That doesn't mean that you didn't do it in a reasonable way, but in my experience, it generally is not done in the most strategic way. And thus, I just don't want my fingerprints on it, right? When my fingerprints are on it, I want to know that we did it the most strategic way we possibly could. And no matter how well written your essay is, if it doesn't tell the story it needs to tell, and it doesn't have the elements it needs, it's not going to get you what you need, right? I could write a beautiful story for you, but if it doesn't have the elements, it's not going to get what you need. So to that end, paying for essay editing alone is not going to get you where you need to go. In fact, I would argue that it's better to have a weak written essay, one where maybe your language is not the best, or maybe there's even a mistake or two. That is not as bad as not having the elements. The elements of engagement are fundamentally important for you to be successful in this process. Okay. Now for a moment, imagine where we are in this process. We have gone through all of the students' engagement experiences. We know the most valuable ones, and we've classified them generally. We've now identified the school the student wants to go to, and we've identified the college under the university, and we've identified the prospective majors that we think we have evidence for. And now that we have all of that, we need to make a decision. So we've made a decision in this instance that we are going to use X, whatever it is, prospective major to apply to college. At this point, we are looking to basically begin answering the supplemental essay questions. These supplemental essay questions are very, very important. For the most part, if there's a brand new admissions director or dean at a university, one of the typical things you will see them do is rewrite the supplemental essay questions that the college or university will be asking. It's almost like their way of putting their footprint or handprint on the process, if you will. In fact, when I went to Cornell, I rewrote the question, and the question actually that's being asked at Cornell was rewritten again by the current director of admissions at Cornell, who I hired when I was there. But because we have very similar experiences, it's still a very, very similar question, although reworded a little bit. These supplemental essay questions are very important, and I will tell you, we see it. And when I was in college admissions, you could see the energy and effort put into the personal statement or college essay that's going to every school. And you could see the lack of effort, especially if you were the backup school. Let's say, when I was working at Lehigh and kids who wanted to go to Columbia apply to Lehigh as a backup school, you see the lack of effort in these supplemental essays. You see the lack of understanding of how the university can support what the student wants to do because they were less interested in the school, they spent less time and energy. And because the college admissions officers know that, they run to these essays first. This is the most important area, in my opinion, of the application if they ask supplemental essay questions. And most of those questions are why us questions. What does why us mean? Why us basically is they're asking you, why do you want to come to this college? But why us isn't just why do you want to come to Cornell? It's why do you want to come to Cornell to study what you say you want to study, right? And in order to answer that question, you need to explain how you explored what you want to study, why you think you're ready to contribute to that space, and then why Cornell, in fact, is the right place to further and help you become ready to contribute to a community. The thing you have to understand here is that applying to college really is like applying for a job. Imagine for just a moment that you're applying to become a lifeguard. If you happen to be a very strong swimmer, you could argue that you are qualified for the position because based on the fact that you're able to swim, that is the most important component of the position. So you could argue you're qualified. But what if the position description for a lifeguard states that you are required, the successful candidate is required to be CPR certified? And what if you didn't know that before you applied? You could be the best swimmer on the face of this earth and you would still not be qualified for that position. In this instance, we are not applying for a job, we're applying to a college. And instead of a position description, we have a college or departmental description. It's the applicant's challenge to evaluate, based on your academic narrative, why he or she is ready to contribute to that college or university. The most effective way to do this is to understand the synergies and connections between your academic story and the opportunities and ethos of the college you are applying to. Because I think this is a very important process. We help all of our clients create the first supplemental essay research template for their early decision or early action school. So what you're looking at right now on the screen is an example, a portion of the supplemental essay research template. So in this instance, a student has identified, I want to go to Cornell. In this instance, the one I brought up here, the student wanted to study under the crime, prison, and education program major. So what did we do? We're now looking, based on the student's experiences and based on what the student says they want to do, we are looking for specific opportunities at the college to illustrate the student knows what the opportunity is and they know what they're going to do when they get there, or at least ideas of what they're going to do. So as you can see, we gave an example of the Price Initiative, which is an initiative around politics, race, immigration at Cornell. We noted the Cornell Daily Sun, which is the newspaper there where a lot of students are writing about social justice related issues. We noted the Scholars for Academic Freedom because there's a lot of writing that's going on around equity and access through the Scholars for Academic Freedom program. And then the Political Theory Workshop, which kind of explores equity and access through a theoretical perspective. So those are very important decisions about what you choose and how that connects to what you've done and how that connects to the university. Okay, so remember, by the time we got gotten to this point, we've already ensured that we know which aspects of students' engagement that we're going to use, and we know which prospective major, or in some rare cases, multiple majors, the student will be applying under. The final element is this part where we add the specific aspects from the school that illustrate how the student might spend his or her time strongly connected to the prior experiences. Now, let me just make one caveat here. Lots of students put in research or classes into their supplemental essays. They throw in, I want to take XY class, or I want to do research under X, Y, and Z faculty member. That is not the same thing. These are very strategically and intentional decisions. It's not like, I just randomly want to take that class. It's that specific class will provide that specific type of information that impacts the experience I had doing X, right? Very clear connections are important if you want to differentiate yourself in this process. The following is an example here of a final product. I've never shown a final product before, I don't think, mostly because it's so hard to show a final product by itself and have it illustrate something. But I thought this one might, and so I just want to kind of walk you through what I think is important about this specific final product. This is a supplemental essay. It was written specifically for Cornell by one of my clients. And I want to note a few things here. First, I want to note the opening paragraph that you can probably read because the text is so large. And I'm just going to read it out loud for you here just to get a sense of what I'm talking about. The tailing auger was at 0. Something was wrong. I jumped down from the combine and saw the header was filled with dirt and rocks. In 3 years running combine, I'd never plugged the header, never broken down. As I clawed through the rocks and dirt, pawing at the obstruction on all fours, all I could think was, my viewers are going to love this episode. So as you can see, this is not a typical start of a supplemental essay. Oftentimes students start off like, I want to study at NYU because it's located in New York City, or I want to study psychology, right? This is a story within a story. We're starting with a story. We're bringing the reader to the moment. And through this moment, we are going to illustrate to the reader the way the student has spent their time and their energy preparing for the opportunity that is the prospective major they're applying to. So we start with a story within a story. That doesn't mean every single supplemental essay starts like this, but some of them do. And if you want to differentiate yourself at a top tier school and you don't have all of the perfect grades and standardized test scores and academic rigor, this is one way to do it. And I also want to note the highlighted green parts. All of the highlighted in green, what you're seeing there are specifically chosen experiences or opportunities at the college or university that very clearly connect to what the student has done or experienced before. The text that's in I guess it's the fourth paragraph, it's a little bit larger, maybe not large enough for you to read, but I'm going to start, it's the beginning of the paragraph. I'm just going to read it to you because I think it's really important. One of my most popular episodes is Spring Wheat Sawflies and Supper, where I expose viewers to the devastation caused by the sawflies that girdle the stems of wheat plants. So what does that mean? This young lady happened to be working on a farm where on this farm, the wheat plant actually was attacked by a fly called a sawfly, and the sawfly, chews into the stem of the plant and ruins the plant. Why is that important? Well, that was an experience the student had that I learned about as I was speaking with her. And while we were researching Cornell, what we found was they are also looking at wheat plants. They're engaged in research actually to determine how to make the wheat plant stronger to fight against insect infestation and ruining the plant. If we were to miss that, let's just say for argument's sake, we didn't use the experience of the flies attacking the wheat and didn't connect that to the research that's being done in the college on wheat, that would have been a huge missed opportunity to illustrate how this college and the research that's being done can support the direction of this student. That type of understanding and connection can put you over the top, even if you don't have the best stats. Okay. We're almost done. I appreciate all of your patience, and I look forward to answering your questions. If you can recall back now to the slide with my handwritten notes, classifying each of the students' experiences, I just want to tell you a very short story to kind of give you some structure around what I'm talking about. The student who I showed you with my handwritten notes, the student's name is Kate. Kate's parents are both attorneys on the West Coast. They found me shortly after the pandemic had started. And according to Kate's father, I remember him saying, we're really impressed by your understanding of college admissions, John. But towards the end of the conversation, I still remember when he said, John, can I just stop you for one moment? With all due respect, my wife and I are, established attorneys. I'm a fine writer. We would love to hire you, but do you really think you add that much value? I remember him asking me that. And of course, most attorneys are strong writers, and I could understand his perspective. I said to him, listen, imagine, just close your eyes and imagine just for one moment, you're trying an important case here. Would you consider it a fair fight if you were educated on, say, only 50% of the legal rules and maneuvers? I said, much like in the courtroom, in this complex college admissions process, insight and understanding is what is being valued here, right? The insight and understanding of what is valued by the people making the decisions, that is the most valued commodity. If we understand what they value, right, that insight will inform our strategic use of time, our strategic use of energy. That insight creates this strong academic story. That insight ultimately leads to offers of admission. And, I don't generally talk about student statistics or where they go to college because I really do believe that, we help students get to a wide variety of different types of schools, and success is relative. But Kate specifically, Kate had no standardized tests. She took no AP courses and no AP exams. She attended an online high school and took an unintended gap year after receiving the 0 offers of admission. Not only 45 days ago, Kate was admitted ED to Cornell University. That's the power of the right story to the right audience. So whether you work with me, our team, someone else, or you go about it alone, it's imperative you are informed, or you will not be giving yourself the best chance to earn an offer from a top-tier college or university. Even Kate, who, when I first heard her describe herself, even I didn't think that she had a great shot. But as I learned more about her, I saw the story come into vision, and I was able to translate that story into an offer from an Ivy League school. Not everyone can do that. She had unique experiences, but she didn't see how those experiences turned into an academic story. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you so much for your time here. I want to quickly, finally finish this up with just an overview of structurally kind of where I stand here. Before we jump into the Q&A, I want to discuss my partnership with IvyCompass. I love working with students. I love developing strategies to help capable young people reach new heights. And in an effort to improve my product, increase capacity, I was looking for an organization that can help provide infrastructure and resources. So I'm happy to say that I found that support through my partnership here with IvyCompass. There are many, many good reasons for the partnership. This is a good decision for me, but some of the main reasons for you are on the slide. First and foremost, language support. If English is a second language or English isn't strong for parents, I think I've struggled sometimes to convey exactly what I'm thinking to maybe a family that English isn't their first language. So I think that will certainly help. The second part is enhanced parental engagement and updates. I document everything. I have a Google Drive where students can see everything we've done. Parents can see everything we've done, but sometimes parents aren't going to go into the Google Drive. And so in those instances, I think it's really helpful to have someone on the IvyCompass team that can keep our parents engaged. And then the final part was really this access to robust academic resources. For the most part, when it comes to academic resources, I outsource because I can't be the consultant and the mentor. I can't do everything, prepare them for competition. So there's outsourcing to other experts to make sure we have the elements. And what I found was it's hard to control the quality when you're doing a lot of outsourcing. And so to that end, having IvyCompass here to help have a whole wing dedicated to, say, academic competition, building community engagement and mentorship, I find that to be really a nice benefit as it relates to ensuring quality control, making sure that the research we're doing supports the story we're trying to tell, or the competition we're engaging in supports the story we're trying to tell. So overall, a really strong partnership. And of course, I'll let my colleagues talk about that partnership a little bit more. Thank you for your time and energy, ladies and gentlemen. I look forward to the Q&A session.
Thank you. Thank you very much, John. That was a wonderful presentation. I think your presentation already answered a lot of questions, but I think, Allison, do you want to go share the screen and put on the request before I do the Q&A?
Okay. 感谢 John 今天的thank you John so much for today's very wonderful presentation. Okay, I switch to Chinese. 在我们进入 Q&A 之前的话呢，我这边来预告一下AFI 的这一个教育的这个非盈利的合作机构叫思慧学院，我预告一下他们的这个春季的 K12的课程。思慧学院的话呢，我们主要是致力于为我们的这一个 AFI 的成员以及北美的华人提供最优质的一个线上的课程，并且是以这个最可负担的价格。K12的课程的话呢，在这一个春天的话呢，有几个分块哈。第一个就是说我们的这个 K12的财商课程，以及我们的这一个青少年的投资竞赛课程，还有我们的青少年的政治领导力的课程。这个高中K12的这一个财商和投资的竞赛课程的话呢，思慧学院的话呢，应该说是我们的这一个北美的首家哈。今年的话呢，我们也是取得了非常好的一个成绩。思慧学院的话呢，在这一个今年的话呢，我们是带了两个队伍进入到这个沃顿的最后的这个一轮，就是全美的这个 Top 50的这一个Next Level。沃顿商赛的话呢，如果了解的话呢，大家了解的家长的话呢，会知道这是一个全美的这个含金量最高的这样的一个投资比赛。对于这个高中生的这个升学来说呢，也是含金量是非常高的。今年的话呢，思慧学院呢有2个队伍进入到了这一个全球的 Top 50，在全球的5500个队伍之中脱颖而出。 想要了解这个课程的家长的话呢，现在你看到屏幕上呢会有一个小助手的二维码，您可以扫码来联系小助手。除了我们的这个财商和投资课程之外的话呢，我们还有另外的这个青少年的领导力课程，以及这个 K12的这个演讲辩论和写作课程。此外的话呢，思慧学院呢还和这个大疆机器人合作，会带给大家在这个机器人方面的更多的课程。现在我们来看一下其他的一些课程的一些详情。大家可以看到哈，这是青少年的投资课程，由这个思慧学院和前基金经理来共同华尔街的前基金经理来共同打造的。目前的话呢，我们已经是第一轮的课已经是开始了。如果想要报名的话呢，可以报这个4月份开始的第2轮的这个课程，包括这个 Kids Stock Game、Youth Investment Series， 还有 Youth Investment Summer Bootcamp。Summer Bootcamp 的话呢，是针对这一个可能你在春季的话呢没有太多的时间，然后的话呢你可能是想要在这个夏天来集中学习，很适合这样的一个孩子。更多的详情的话，当然欢迎大家联系我们的这个小助手来进行咨询。现在看到的呢是这个青少年的财商课程，这个的话呢是适合我们是说3年级到6年级，以及这个4年级到7年级的年龄较小的学生。这个的话呢，主要是培养这个孩子的这一个财商，以及对这个父母的劳动成果有 appreciate 的这样的一个课程。这个课程的话呢，是思慧学院的话呢和这一个杨安泽团队的前筹款的负责人Don Sung 来合作的。主要是为了培养这个青少年的政治领导力方面的这样的一个软实力吧。除了课程之外的话呢，优秀的学生呢还有机会能和Don Sung一起来参与这个政治方面的一些实习，包括这个筹款和竞选的一些活动。所以对于想要走这一个 political science 的以及这一个 liberal arts 的学生来说的话呢，这个锻炼机会呢是非常的难得。此外的话呢，思慧学院也有一些成人的这个职场课程以及成人的投资课程，在这里的话呢，我就不多花时间来为大家介绍了。更多的详情的欢迎大家来登录这一个思慧学院的网站哈www.wisewise.academy.com 来进行咨询。此外的话呢，也可以扫这个小助手的二维码来就是了解更多的课程详情。好的，我现在把时间呢交还给 Sophia， 然后我们可以开始进入到我们的 Q&A 的环节。
好的，谢谢 Alison。我是这样，因为那个 question 特别多，我们尽量回答大家的问题哈，然后还可以给一些时间去大家举手，跟这样有一个直接的这个 question 和 answer 的这个 session。如果有的问题没有被回答到的话呢，请加入我们这个小助手的二维码，扫码进群了以后，我们可以一一的回答您一些细节的问题哈。现在我来go through some of the general question。第一个 Susan 有一个问题，我觉得实际上很多家长都会问，但这个问题我相信 through the presentation John maybe already answered that. Susan was asking how some students with high standardized tests like SAT 1550 are rejected. What are the qualities in students that top tier university looking for? I think through your presentation actually already answered. Okay, so I'm just go next question.
I'll just give a real quick. Basically, the SAT is that first round of review, right? So you can get past that first round of review. That gets you to the rest of it, right? Looking at all your story. And thus, students who have 1550s who get rejected, they made it past the first round. They got to their story or academic area of interest. They didn't see what they needed. That's how they got rejected.
Okay. Amy Tutu is asking John, is it possible for you to share your firm EA statistics so far? How many top 5, top 20, top 10 for EA or ED?
Yeah, so first and foremost, again, as you think about ED versus EA, very few students, in my opinion, is it a smart decision for them to forego ED at the expense so that they can apply EA, right? So for those of you who don't know the difference quickly, early decision, right? You're committed to attending the institution. You are saying in advance of submitting your application, if I am accepted, I will withdraw my other applications and I will attend. Early action, you're not committed to attending. You're just finding out early. Early decision, because you are committed, those schools have a vested interest in making sure, or in filling a very large percentage of their class. University of Pennsylvania, for example, fills 55% of their class in ED. Northwestern fills 59% of their class in ED. And so if you're not in that group, it's quite difficult. So most of my students do not apply restrictive EA because you cannot apply ED under that. So most of my students will apply to an early decision round. Of the students that I've had apply this past year to an ED round, 18 of the 22 were admitted to the schools that they wanted. 4 students either were not admitted or intentionally decided to apply to one of the restrictive EA schools because of, a reasonable backup. For example, one of my students lives in Texas. She can go to UT Austin as a guaranteed. So she said, I want to take my shot at Harvard, which, I thought was a reach. She thought was a reach, but based on the backup option, that was the decision. So I had a very good year. 18 out of 22 of my students admitted early. That doesn't happen every single year. I don't want to pretend every single student gets in all the time because that certainly is not possible. But if you follow the advice I give and you are reasonable within the context of benchmarking your college list, and we do it the right way, my students are admitted.
Thank you, John. Frank Shane is asking John, if other things equal, which student is more likely to be admitted by Ivy colleges? An average Canadian student at Phillips Exeter versus a top student at a Canadian public school?
That's a tough question. Depends on it. There's a lot of variabilities there, but I would say, basically this question really is like, what's the value of Phillips Exeter, right? So what's the value of these top tier private high schools? And, I would say that there is certainly some value there because college and universities, we refer to basically any high school that sends, say, more than 20 applications to a college is referred to as a feeder high school. And a feeder high school is a high school that as a college you pay attention to, meaning that, you don't want to make a bunch of really poor decisions that no one understands at Phillips Exeter, because what happens then is the smart kids from the next year's class start to think that, you let a bunch of weak kids in, maybe your school is not as good as we thought it was. So there's a focus on consistency at feeder schools like Phillips Exeter. And because there's a focus on consistency of taking the similar number of students per year, that does give them some level of advantage as compared to a non-feeder school where you're kind of just making a decision within the context of what you see right in that moment.
Thank you. I think the next one is a good question. Sylvia from Sylvia Wu. Is it computer science in colleges or arts? Arts and science easier to get into than the one in colleges of engineering?
So it's a really good question, and there's no easy answer to that. I would say computer science in both areas is quite difficult. Computer science in general is going to be one of your most difficult ones. So in my opinion, if you were interested in all these schools kind of classify these things differently, but if we are in fact referring to computer engineering in the engineering college, then I would say I would choose something other than computer engineering as the way you apply, because that'll be one of the most popular ones, that and mechanical engineering. If it's actually computer science, sometimes that does live in the engineering college as well. CS is going to be, even though they're separated by college, oftentimes you're going to see faculty overlap from an experience perspective. I would say that there's no real difference in the competitiveness. You might see a little bit higher SAT scores or ACT scores on the engineering side than the arts and sciences side. But on the arts and sciences side, they're going to expect more broad understanding of how computer science integrates with things like the social sciences. So both are tough. It would depend. If I had to choose, it'd be based upon what the student has done. If the experiences are more social science oriented, I would go arts and sciences college. If they were more engineering oriented, I'd go the engineering college.
Okay, thank you. The next question is coming from Lily Ma. Overrepresented versus underrepresented majors. Does they the same for boys or girls, or is there any major overrepresent to boys but underrepresent to girls, vice versa? That's, I think, based on the presentation you mentioned in this area.
Yeah, great question. So the truth here is, yes, that there's overrepresentation among certain majors for men and maybe not so true for women. And I will even go so far as to say that this is true by college as well. So Like Carnegie Mellon, for example, fantastic school for computer science, super hard for men to get in, not as hard for women to get in. I mean, it's still hard, it's a great school, but I had a lot of students, young ladies admitted to Carnegie Mellon that were at least academically significantly weaker than their male counterparts just because of the overrepresentation of men in the applicant pool. Same thing with the prospective majors. Generally speaking, in the STEM areas, men obviously are overrepresented, and oftentimes women, especially in the core STEM areas like chemistry and physics, computer science to some degree, although we're seeing more of that now, especially chemistry, physics, math, you definitely see underrepresentation from women. And so at some schools, that's what we refer to as a hook. At Cornell, women in STEM was a hook, meaning that we were looking for students like that. Now, STEM didn't mean all STEM areas. It didn't mean biology, for example, because that's not an area where they're underrepresented.
Okay, thank you. Okay, let me go see next one. Which college categorized for math major? Is business or engineering?
Math as a major is actually usually in the College of Arts and Sciences. The major itself would be in College of Arts and Sciences. Math as a skill set would be super valued, of course, both in business and in engineering colleges. So if you apply to an engineering college, Cornell, for example, I believe they ask in the engineering college specifically, tell us the last math course you're taking in your senior year of high school. That course is almost like a moving average. So if you are taking pre-calc, for example, and the average level is Calc AB or Calc BC, then you would not be getting into the College of Engineering just based on that specific math sequence. So math is super valued and important in both engineering and math, but the major itself is going to be in the College of Arts and Sciences.
Okay. Next question from Yun is, should you submit 1460 test score, math being 780, grade at a well-known private school as since freshman, or just taking SAT again?
The SAT is in flux. The fact of the matter here is that my colleagues and friends at Cornell, as I ask them all the time, just because I'm curious, when I was at Cornell, just to give you a quick overview, like the SAT was super important. I mean, my staff, the people who are on my staff, they used it, and they used it rather significantly. And I am blown away by what has happened since the pandemic, basically, where standardized tests have become significantly less important. If we use Cornell as the example, at Cornell, you have 7 colleges. 5 of them decided to be blind this year, and 2 of them decided to be optional. The 2 that decided to be optional, arts and sciences and engineering, they wanted the SAT. That's why they were optional. If not, they would have been blind. And the fact of the matter is only 30%, approximately 30% of the applicants submitted test scores, even at engineering and arts and sciences college that wanted it. And when you only have 30% being submitted, it's really hard to use it. So I think we're in such a state of flux here. It's really quite difficult to determine how it's going to be used and to what level it's going to be used next year, depending on what school we're talking about. I say you should take the test. You should prep for it to the best of your ability. When you get a test, you take a practice test. If you take the real test and you do significantly worse, then I think you should take the real test again. If you take the real test and you do about the same, that's when I would say I would not go and try, just keep beating your head against the wall to get a higher test score, because I do think that there are better things you can do with your time, like building research, by building a community advocacy that would have a significantly larger impact than a standardized test score. But getting back to your question, I would take the test as many times as I can, or take the test up to the point where I feel reasonable, 1 or 2 times. At that point, when I feel like I've done as good as I can with a reasonable amount of effort, I would look at the school I'm interested in. I would take the median score, the middle 50% score. And if my score is at or above it, I'd submit the test. If my score is below it, I would not submit the test. I'd apply under the optional category. I know it's a long answer, but this is a very complex area because of all the changes to the standardized testing systems.
Okay, thank you, John. The next question from Amy W. My child is committed to do 3 different sports in the school year. Should I be concerned as my child does not have demonstrated an interest and depth?
I love sports. I really do. And I played sports in high school, and I would have been very upset if my parents told me like, hey, you got to quit that sport so you can be involved in science Olympiad. But the truth of the matter here is colleges don't care that you play sports unless you're planning on being a recruited athlete. Do sports provide a lot of value to life? Yes, teamwork and community and blah, blah, blah. And could you in theory write about it, those things on some of the essays? Yes, you might be able to, and I've seen some good ones. But the needle mover, the thing that's going to keep you in or keep you out is not going to be whether you're involved musically, artistically, or athletically. It's going to be, what do you want to study? Do you have engagement that supports that? And academically, are you as strong or better than some of the students that are applying here? So if I had a student that was playing 3 sports, would I be concerned? I think it depends. Are they capable of keeping all their grades up and also building evidence that they're interested in another area outside the classroom? If the answer is yes, then God bless them. If the answer is no, then I would take the sport that they like the least, cut it out, and then fill that with some level of academic engagement.
Okay, great. Thank you. Cindy Zhao is looking for a good mentor. You can add a Allison or either this, Arima. Then we can bring you to the group. We can answer some questions. IvyCompass also offering some of the customized background improvement for mentor and research. So this is something we can answer to you later on if you add Allison or my WeChat group. Okay. Hold on one second. Right now it's about 10:48. Should we open some for parents raise their hand to answer some of their questions?
I'll try to make my answers faster. I'll make them shorter from now on so we can go for quicker.
Okay. Right now, GZ, do you want to, you're the first one, raise your hand.
I think Dorothy's son, maybe. Oh, whatever. I mean, I allowed both GZ and Dorothy's son to talk. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Great.
Hey, this is GZ.
Hello. Hi. Oh, sorry.
Oh, should I talk?
Yeah, GZ first.
Yeah.
Go ahead,
Okay.
GZ.
So yeah, GZ. My name is Green Zhang. My daughter, she's currently a sophomore student, and she is choosing lots of art class in school. And so my question is like, does John work with the art student for college application? My daughter, she may apply art in a university, or she may go to, she may apply art college. Now it's like we have hard time to decide which one to go, because she is interest of art. She's also thinking about like a psychology and nursing, those type of things.
Ooh, okay, that's a good question. So, nursing that's like a whole separate question and issue because it's a whole separate program. It's based on clinical space. That's like I'll hold that off for a second because that's a whole different subject. The art and music. I'll just kind of join together here. If you apply to college, to any highly selective school as an art major or a prospective music majors generally are going to audition. Art majors are going to have a portfolio review. Of course, the auditions are done in front of faculty members and portfolio reviews are done by faculty members. And in my experience, those faculty opinions are super important, assuming the students' grades are reasonable. They're not going to, even if the faculty loves an art portfolio, if your grades aren't where they need to be, they're not going to get in. But assuming your grades are where they need to be, your rigor's where it needs to be, just because the reader didn't like your essay, for example, that's not going to be a reason you don't get in if the faculty member loves your portfolio or loves your audition. So if you think you have that skill set, it's worthwhile to evaluate, is my portfolio going to be at the level that it's going to be a needle mover? Is my audition going to be at that needle mover level? I, of course, cannot do that. I'm sure there are people on our team that can suggest that. If the answer is yes, that the student is at that level, I would suggest that you use that and you get someone to help build the portfolio the right way, because that portfolio will be the defining decision maker. Yes, you want well-written essays, but this whole story of building an academic focus the way I'm talking about would be less important if you were focused on art as your end goal.
Excellent. Right now it's almost 11. We still have a 5:34 audience waiting to get a question and answer from you. That's wonderful. Also, I want to, by the way, to say IvyCompass, we're also offering independent college counselor for an art-focused motion pictures and also art in terms of specialty. And this consultant will be presented in February, March. So if your kids interested in the art area, wait for our presentation in February, March, or at our WeChat, we can also directly connecting you to this counselor. I just wanted to make everybody aware.
And I've never helped anybody actually apply to an art school specifically. I know that was the other part of the question. So that would need someone specific for that area as well.
Right. And we do have this kind of resource. So if you kids in this special area, connecting to Allison and me, and we will be making connection to the specialized in art application. Next one for Dorothy. Dorothy, son. Dorothy, you want to speak? If it's not, then Sharon Wang.
Yes.
Sharon?
Hi. Yes. Hi, John. Thank you for the presentation. Very helpful. I have a question about majors. So my daughter is a junior this year. So if she is interested in like a double major or two directions, and she's not sure which one to devote, and the two could be related, is it a good idea to mention both in the application? And also a related question is, since different, college or area have a different, presentation, do you think it's a good idea to choose different majors when applying different colleges or universities?
Good question. If you don't mind me asking though, what areas are they, or do you not want to share that?
Yeah, one of the majors is classics, and the other one is either economics or policies, etc.
Okay. So here's what I would say. If there is in fact depth in both areas, I mean, the classics would be quite compelling because there are very few students that want to study the classics. So if the student actually has anything related to that space, you definitely want to put that down. That's not even a question. Let's just say the student has some good solid evidence and engagement in classics and maybe some in economics, but not super impressive. I probably would focus on the classics at that point, only because you're going to get way more students that are interested in economics. And if you start putting the economic stuff in there, it's easier for the reader to believe that that's probably your main focus, and the classics is the backup. And making classics be the more focused probably gives you a competitive advantage if you have evidence in that specific space. So, in regards to whether you should put two programs down generally, I would say it depends on the substance you have and depends on the majors you're talking about. But classics is a compelling one if you have it. And then the second question was about
when you apply different universities, is it a good idea to differ the majors?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that question comes up a lot when students, for example, they want to do the public health route because they hear me say that that's the way to do it, so we do it. But then they want to apply to a BSMD program, and now they're like, well, I have to put pre-med down there, so why don't I just pick different, whatever school I'm applying to, I go pre-med here, public health there. Here's the issue. This application, one of the thing college admissions officers are trained on the most is inconsistency, right? Show me, their job is to identify, like, does it look like a duck, walk like a duck, sound like a duck? If it does, it's a duck. And the second there's an inconsistency, that's just a moment of pause and a red flag. And at highly selective schools, inconsistencies are just like, move on, right? Because it's like, oh, we don't know, this doesn't seem right. Let's just choose someone that we understand. And so what happens is if you choose different majors is you run the risk of an inconsistency, like your guidance counselor putting, identifying something on a document that's not what you represent for this school, or teacher recommendations, which happens all the time, where, the student says, I'm interested in, we decided to go public health, but one day during class, the kids said they wanted to become a physician. And now in the letter of rec, it says, he's going to make a great physician. And making sure that all of that is orchestrated, that the right letters of rec going to the right schools and the people aren't writing the wrong thing, in my experience, doesn't work. And is a huge risk, because if it doesn't work, like, you're not getting in even to schools you might have gotten in regularly, right? If there's an inconsistency. So it can be done, but if you do it, you have to be all over it to make sure that no one's making any mistakes, basically.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. I saw two questions very good, and I wanted to kind of insert. One person say, when is good time to hire a college counselor? The best time.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think, in my opinion, the earlier the better, obviously, because if you have two students, 9th grade and 11th grade, they have the same ability. One decides in 11th to go to direction, one decides in 9th. It's hard for the student in 11th to overcome the student in 9th because you have a year and a half to 2 years of building evidence. And that evidence is, in fact, the substance that gets you in. So in theory, the earlier, the better. I will just use the caveat that, I do think that the student needs to be, I wouldn't say like dying to do it, but they have to at least be willing to do it, right? Because this isn't something you can force down someone's throat. This is a learning process. It requires engagement. So as long as the student's open to it, then I'd say the earlier the better.
Okay. And there's often parents ask me, since John, you are the former admission officer for Cornell, are you only specialized for Cornell, or are you able to help kids in all different top 20 schools?
Yeah, of course I have a significant advantage at Cornell because I, actually worked there and I know everything about every college there. And I know the people reading the apps there, right? There's a huge advantage there. The rest of the colleges, I think my insight is about as good as you can get. I mean, as I said, when I was at Cornell, we hosted the Ivy Plus conference, every Ivy League school plus MIT, Duke, and Stanford. I know exactly what they do at all of those places because I saw, I met with their team and I saw their processes. So I would say, I think my knowledge is about as good as it could possibly be for the top schools in the country. But Cornell obviously is a huge advantage, and a lot of people do hire me specifically for that.
John, can you just tell everyone where your student going to the school name list? Just list a couple because people might be very interested where your school just passed for this application season.
Yeah, I mean, I literally 50% of my students are going to Cornell and Penn. Those are two, you have to understand, people are surprised when I say that. And the reason I think they think is that all that John is good at, Cornell and Penn? But, these people spend time working with me, their family, we talk through this process, and they start to hear my opinions about, what's the difference in competitiveness to go to Harvard or Yale versus go to Penn, right? And so as they go through all this process, they often lean towards many of the things that I think. And I believe I know exactly what Penn's looking for. I think I know exactly what Cornell's looking for at each of the different colleges. And I've been super successful. Every student who I had applied to Penn this year was accepted. I think I was 4 for 4 in my exclusive group. And I think I was 6 for 6 or 7 for 7 with Cornell students this year. I have a student going to Northwestern. I have a student going to Emory. I have a student going to Tulane. I have a student going to Columbia. Within the context of the restricted EA schools, I don't have any outright admitted restricted EA schools to Harvard, Princeton, or Yale this year. I had one deferral. We'll see what happens with that student. But most of my students don't apply there under the restricted piece. Most of my students will apply to the restricted EA schools under RD, mostly because I don't think there's a huge benefit to the restrictive EA. So they throw in RD and they haven't heard from most of the top 5 schools yet. I'm not overly hopeful because they're top 5 in RD for a reason, but most of those students are actually already admitted ED. So if they were to be admitted to those places, they would have to actually get out of the ED commitment to attend those places.
Okay, thank you, John. I think next one, raise hand for going to Lee Shu Ping. You can speak now.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Just 2 questions. Number 1, do you think the high school debate team experience matters for college application? If it matters or helps, what major would the debate experience help? Second question is, if the kids are interested to apply for econ major or finance major, those are more like a soft major, what kind of research or things they need to do versus those like hard science kind of related interest?
Great question. So debate answer is yes, debate's valued. I think, basically the idea is that the ability to effectively communicate your perspective is valued across the board. And it, of course, many debate students will naturally fall into things like government, political science, public policy, but I would argue that debate does in fact support pretty much every major. I mean, is it going to help you if you're applying to the engineering college? Maybe not, but maybe the exception of that, debate's going to work across the board. So I always tell families and students, debate, newspaper, those type things are very flexible and good things to be involved in. Finance versus econ, first of all, these are two, econ is like the bridge between the arts and sciences college and the business college. Finance is in the business college, not in the arts and sciences college. So in my mind, those are two very different kind of ways you build your application, econ versus finance. Generally, economics is way better to build a story because a story about how people use and distribute scarce resources is generally more compelling than the, kind of moving around of fiat currency, which is generally what we're talking about as relates to finance. So most of my finance related students will lean towards economics from a story perspective. As it relates to research in these spaces, I've done tons of economic research with my clients, and it's fascinating stuff. I mean, it's usually built around social issues, like social public policy related issues. I've probably given the example a million times, but it's like this most clear example from my perspective is students involved in she was doing volunteerism at a homeless shelter, right? We take homeless shelter and we ask ourselves, how does homeless shelter connect to economics? Well, a homeless shelter is basically a physical manifestation of public policy, public economic policy that says we'd rather pay for people to have a roof over their head than have them on the street. So we've now identified a connection between the experience of volunteering in a homeless shelter and economics. Now we have to develop a question. So we develop a question. I developed that question by literally Googling in the student's area, like, low-income housing, and something came up and there was a big debate about low-income housing in this area. So now we have an issue. We develop a question. The question is, how does low-income housing impact the economic vitality of a community? We engage in academic research on that question. We get a faculty member from a university that can help the student refine that question and actually engage in research, whether that's a lit review type research or otherwise, depends on the topic and depends on the faculty member, but they engage in research. They have a finding of, and the student, their finding was short-term economic impact is positive, short-term it's negative, long-term it's positive. So now we have a finding and we take that finding and we use the finding to advocate for a change to the community. So, there was this debate about low-income housing. So the student wrote an article advocating to bring in the low-income housing based upon the experience of working at a homeless shelter and the research done with the faculty member. And so in a short period of time, the student goes from somebody who's volunteering at a homeless shelter, which for the most part, unless it's connected to something no one really cares about in college admissions, but then they turned it into something important because that experience provided them insight into something related to public economics. They found an issue, they explored the issue, they researched the issue. Now they're relatively compelling. So you can explore, there's lots of social science related research that can be done. I've done, discrepancies between funding between high schools. I've done the efficacy of remedial programs during the summer. I've done public transportation as it relates to how public transportation impacts the economic vitality of the community. I mean, there's a million different examples of research, but your question's a great one. And most high school students don't recognize this as research. And when they do, it often changes their perspective on how to explore the world around them.
Very excellent. I just wanted to promote WizWise a little bit. WizWise has an excellent coach for speech and debate. So if you're interested to get into the debate competition, you can make a connection to Allison. WizWise has a wonderful, wonderful coach for speech and debate in that area. So I just wanted to let everyone know. Okay, next one, you can unmute yourself. Liu, maybe it's Michael, M-I-C, Liu, you can speak now.
Hi, sorry, I just come with a bad cold, so my voice is kind of rough. My son is interested in sports journalism. So I was wondering if John has any recommendations in terms of what suggestions that he can do to further explore his interest.
Great question. I always get a little nervous around the athletic built applications because you're going to get a lot of them. And basically every single athlete that applies, like, they'll start talking about either exercise science or like some type of sports marketing journalism or something like that. So there's a lot of competition in that space. So I don't, it doesn't mean you can't do it, but just got to be aware of it. As it relates to kind of what I would do, I can't off the top of my head tell you like programs related to sports journalism. What I would do is, the real academic students are going to be focused on journalism, right? And you're going to build around the principles of journalism. What are the different types of journalism? What are different ways of building an article? What are the different mediums that you can express yourself? I would focus on that. And then athletics happens to be the topic that he is engaging in, exploring, but it's exploring journalism itself as an academic endeavor. And then I would keep athletics on the side. And what does that mean? Like, well, if you go to an academic department, like what is journalism at a university, and you look at the courses they're taking, the types of research they're doing or the projects they're working on, that'll give you insight into kind of like what is the intellectual aspect of journalism at the collegiate level. You kind of hit on those different points, and then you explore that through, I guess, an investigation of some type of athletics.
Okay, thank you, John.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm going to take 3 more audience to answer questions. Okay, 3 more. Next one, Megan. Megan, you can speak now.
Hi. I'm Denzel. I'm looking to be a comp-sci major. And I've been taking violin classes for like maybe 8 years or so. And so I was thinking that as he said, it probably wouldn't really factor in all that well with my resume story. So I was thinking, would it be worth it to like continue? Because I've been doing it for quite a while, or should I maybe make time for like do something?
A good question. I think this is a question a lot of students run into. Like, if John is telling me that this isn't going to further my goal of getting into X school, should I continue to do it? And I always think it's opportunity cost, right? That's like what life is all about. If I'm doing this, what else could I be doing? And is it worth it? I think that you need to ask yourself to start, what is my goal? If it's to get into a specific college, then you have to ask yourself, do I have the other elements necessary to get into that college? And if the answer is yes, then you continue piano or violin. I think you said you were playing, because, I think it's important to express yourself in different ways. And if you've been doing it for a long time, it's hard to give something up like that. If you say, well, I don't have the elements I need, and that goal is really important to me, well, then you have to ask yourself, is it worthwhile changing direction and reusing your time in something that's going to move you further to your goal? I think the answer generally is like, yeah, obviously there are definitely some things you could do that would give you a better chance to get into a computer science program than play a violin. The question is, can you do both of them at the same time?
Okay, thank you, Sean. Okay, next one, the last 2. Next one is Marilyn Lee.
Thank you, Allison and John. This is wonderful. I have a quick question. So my son is interested in the business or the econ major. So if he get accepted into a very selective competitive camp, summer camp, and then he has a choice to go to internship as an investment banker here, what's your preference? And then if it's an internship, if it's unpaid, will that still help for his application?
So I'm sorry. So he has an opportunity to do internship as an investment banker, and then what was the other option?
Versus like a B-Bay, there's an entrepreneurship, like a very selective camp.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
That's a tough one. I really don't. I get like this moment of anxiety when you say that, when you use the term investment banker as the internship, because I know this sounds terrible. But it's especially even in business colleges, it's true. Like the colleges don't want. It's hard to build a story around money, And when you talk about investment banking or hedge fund managers, Wall Street related stuff, you will have a certain tone to your application that isn't really community impact oriented, even in business schools. Like when you see the onset of social entrepreneurship, where we're talking about entrepreneurship within the context of trying to impact the community around you, you see that as very popular in a lot of business schools. I would argue that an internship with an investment banker, unless it was described the right way, is not going to add a whole lot of value. Even if it's an impressive one, it's likely to be seen as focused on something that's not the focus, which is money, or acquired possibly through relationships through family, as opposed to something that they've applied for or done on their own. I think investment banking just comes across as not nearly as genuine. I know it is genuine, right? But I'm just saying to the reader,
Okay.
it doesn't land well. The summer programs, selective summer programs add some value, but again, I think the issue with them is they're structured, right? Meaning that there's adults there that kind of walk you through the different pieces. I would argue if this is a good student who wants to go to a really good school, who's gotten into good selective summer programs, that you should do some type of actual research. If it's economics or research or managerial or finance related, I would do research over that, or community advocacy within the context of the business community. For example, a lot of kids who want to go into business have never even looked at their chamber of commerce before, have no clue what type of support is provided to businesses in their community. So engaging in, I would even say interviewing people at a local chamber of commerce would be stronger than an investment banker internship.
Okay, appreciate that.
All right, thank you. RZ just said I want to ask a quick question. So RZ, go ahead.
Thank you. Hi, John. Thank you for your long talk. Very helpful. My daughter is in her junior year and she's interested in applying for STEM. Can you advise on what will be like very good summer camp for STEM girls that would help?
Yeah, great question. So I think, in the first question that really has to be asked, and this is probably the direction of the summer camp, is, what is the purpose of this summer program? Is it to, within the context of STEM, identify which area of STEM she's interested in, right? Maybe she's interested in bio versus engineering versus math. If that's the case, then you want to go to kind of these exploratory summer programs, which in my mind will not help you get into college, but at the very least will identify the area that you're interested in, which is important. If we already know the area that the student's interested in, then it's not really the quality, I know it sounds crazy when I say it, and everyone thinks I'm crazy, but these college admissions officers do not value Columbia's program more than Lehigh's program for a summer program. Like, that's truly not the case. The value is based upon what did they say they wanted to study, and does that program that you went to support that? And are you able to write about that program in your essays supporting the area you say you're interested in? So it's almost impossible to answer the question without knowing exactly the area. And even if you told me, John, she's interested in computer science, I would say, well, there's a bunch of different areas under computer science. And the key here is to find a summer program that is focused on that area if you're going to use that. So, I have a student right now who's focusing on, one's focused on encryption, other one's focused on neuromorphic computing structures. One's focused on kind of the intersection of data science and computer science as relates to machine learning and AI, right? Those are all kind of like subsection areas, and different camps are going to focus on those different things differently. So you would want to know that before you made a decision, especially in the junior year, because if they do it in the junior year, it has to be important enough to write about if you're doing it in the junior year. So it has to be specific to what the student wants to do.
Thank you. That makes sense.
Okay. Great. Right now, I said the last one. Still, we have a 25 hand is raised. Want to ask a question? So John, you're very popular. Just wanted to let everybody know, John maybe also come to our IvyCompass platform in March to do another presentation. So if the question, you have a question did not get answered, number one, you can join our group, which we can answer some of the question for you. Number two, you can wait until March to listen to John and try to raise hand earlier, so we can call you. Allison, do we have time to continue, or should we just, it's being late? I think John worked very hard since 9 o'clock, so should we give him a break?
Just so you guys know, I'm willing, if you guys want to go another 5-10 minutes, I'm fine with that. And one other thing I'll add is that we did do last year, maybe we consider again, is we did a Q&A last year, just only Q&A, and maybe we could do that again.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. That's also in our plan. So maybe March we can do only, for a Q&A session only. Well, Tutu being put on the notes for several times now. Tutu, are you raise hand or you just have a question? Amy Tutu. If you raise your hand, you can just go ahead, maybe the last one. Yes, go ahead.
Wait a second, I didn't raise hand. That means, okay, so
Amy.
Okay,
Amy
I allowed
Tutu.
Amy to talk, yeah.
Okay, last one.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, John, thank you so much for the presentation. You talked about the rigor of the course, the high school coursework. Just for instance, if my kids are interested in a math major, hypothetically, and then for some reason they are short of one coursework in terms of their senior year. And for instance, their peers are able to take multivariable or differential equation. And somehow she can only do Calc BC. And given that she wants to be a math major, do you think that would be a problem? Would that hurt her?
Are you referring to students taking differential equations at the same high school or at the same high school?
At the same high school, yeah.
And what was the reason for that? Was it just like a course sequencing that they got ahead further, or what was the reason?
Well, so I guess the trick is that you could do a summer class in order to take multivariable in your senior year, and just for somehow we didn't do any summer classes during her high school years.
Okay, gotcha. Here's the thing. I think there are not that many women applying specifically as math majors themselves. So my feeling is that generally the line that is kind of drawn in the sand for, if you want to go, let's just say you want to go to a top tier engineering program, the line is generally BC Calc. And I would say that that's probably good enough, even if some other people applied from her high school that had higher level math. My assumption is there's not that many of them that have higher level math that are female that are also applying as a math major. So my feeling is that she's probably okay. But in theory, yes, if there were, if we're talking about the best school in the country and one or two other students from her high school also applied, they're female, they're also applying math, and they have a higher math sequence, yes, that would be an obstacle to overcome. But my gut tells me that that's unlikely to be the case, and that the few students who have higher math sequencing than her, my hope would be that they're either men or not specifically applying to math. Maybe they're applying to like engineering college, would be kind of a different conversation. So my gut tells me it'd probably be okay, but it's something you at least want to be aware of.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Okay, Allison, shall we close now and give John a break?
Yeah, I think, let's maybe give John a break because we're gonna host a QA special webinar in the near future. So I mean, also you can scan the QR code to get into our WeChat group. If you have some particular questions, you can also post it in the WeChat groups, and maybe we can see if we can, forward the questions to John. But John's super busy, so we do not want to pester him too much. Yeah, so, but you can get into the WeChat group. Yeah.
And I know I see a few questions here about what majors I had these kids apply to. I think I see that a bunch of times, but just so you guys know, the Penn ones, I had 1 public economics, 2 public health, and at Cornell, I had a wide variety of majors. I use Cornell in a wide variety of ways because it's super flexible. There's a million different programs, and I can find programs for people. So I think every single kid who applied to Cornell applied under different programs.
Great, thank you, Amy. Tutu, thank you for your kind words. And thank you 403 audience right now. Stay with us all this time. You are awesome. You're asking intelligent questions. You are very, very smart. And IvyCompass and John, very, very much appreciate you spending Saturday night with us and to investigate, learning, to getting more knowledge about college application, because this is a crucial time for our children. We want to give them the best. We want to give them the best resource to help them along the way to reach their dream. That's most important. So thank you everyone being with us tonight. And thank you AFI and also WizWise to providing this wonderful platform for John to share the knowledge for us to be able to serving you. And we're looking forward to talk to you soon in the WeChat group. And thank you for your support. I really appreciate everyone. Thank you, John.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Alice.
Bye. Thank you. Good night. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you, everyone.